Representative Crenshaw, welcome to the show.
Trevor, thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you for being here. I think you might be the first Republican lawmaker we've had on in maybe, or let me say the first Republican lawmaker we've had on who isn't leaving Congress in maybe like over a year. So thank you very much for being here.
Wow, that's exciting.
I was reading up on you, and there are a few things I never knew about you as a person. One, 37. We're both 37 years old.
It's a good age.
It's a good age, yeah. We've both lived in multiple countries around the world. Mm-hmm. And when I read like your life story, living in, I think it was Ecuador and Colombia, I couldn't help wondering. I was like, I wonder what ideas you have of America that you think have been shaped by living in other places. Because I know I have that.
Yeah.
You know, whereas there are some people who've only lived in America and they see America in a certain way. What is like something that you think has shaped your views on America because you've lived in other countries?
Well, living in other countries, it's fun. I love my upbringing. I plan to go back to my 20-year high school reunion in Colombia next year. And it shaped me in a lot of positive ways, I think. How does it make my view of America different? Certainly makes you appreciate America in many ways. Helps you understand how other people think about the United States.
Oh, that's interesting.
You know, because I was the only American in my entire grade and throughout high school.
Right.
So I spent all 4 years of high school in Bogota. I was the only American that was there all 4 years. So I got a lot of questions as a result, and I had to defend my country as a result in ways that I frankly wasn't prepared for. So
right.
that shaped my view. What I like about America, and I think what we should embrace as Americans, is this idea that people can become American. You can't become French.
Right.
Right? You can't. I'm not even sure you can really become German.
Right.
But you can become an American because the whole point of being an American is that we sort of share this set of ideals, this set of history, this creed, if you will, of Americanism, of Western values that makes us an American, and I think that's a very cool thing.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea because America in itself is an experiment. You know, it's not something that's never been repeated anywhere else in the world. I've always been fascinated by it as a concept. When I was reading through your story, though, it made me wonder. I was like, man, this man probably has interesting and nuanced views on immigration that are shaped by ideas that aren't just formed in America. You know, as somebody who's fluent in Spanish, as somebody who's lived in Colombia, as you said, you're going to go back to your 20-year reunion. You have friends. You have people you would consider even almost family on that side of the world. Let's talk a little bit about immigration, because it feels like America is stuck in its immigration conversation. You know, there is a misconception about what the problems are, what causes the problems, how America can move forward. As somebody who's lived in other countries, some of them which influence America's immigration story, what do you think the problem is? And then maybe afterwards we'll talk about potential solutions going forward.
Well, look, I view the problem as illegal immigration. I'm not sure we have a problem with legal immigration. It depends on who you ask, of course. I personally don't have a problem with legal immigration. My stepmom is a legal immigrant, immigrated from Peru. So, you know, I think most Americans are not anti-immigrant.
Right.
I don't think we should paint them that way. But I think the vast majority of Americans want our border security, you know, and that's the crux of the debate that's going on right now. And we have to differentiate between this conversation about illegal immigration and legal immigration.
So, okay, so
what's the problem with illegal immigration?
No. Let's talk about the conversation in and around that. This is what it feels like to me. Every few years in America, the conversation around the border changes, you know. So when Trump was in office, people were like, oh yeah, he's shutting down the border, he's locking down the border, he's closing down the border, he's building a border wall. And when Biden's in power, people are like, the borders are wide open. It seems like the rhetoric switches wildly. Now, America has its spikes up and down, people coming in, people don't, people come in, people don't. But like you've said this, and that's something that I've appreciated. You've said we shouldn't be using extreme rhetoric to talk about these problems.
Yeah.
Like, do you think the border's wide open?
It would seem that way effectively. So you've had 1.5 million encounters on the border this year. That's an absolute record. Out of that, hundreds of thousands have been released into the interior. So this catch and release idea that we keep hearing about, it is effectively true. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. There's an incentive structure that incentivizes people to bring minors across, because our courts can't deal with that. I could go into a long history of why that is if you'd like me to, but it gets wonky. But the point is that's the nature of the problem right now. It's existed since about 2014. That's why you see these waves. So there's certain policies that can prevent that incentive structure. You can keep people in Mexico while they claim their asylum claim. You can have people claim asylum within their home countries. That was part of the asylum cooperation agreements we established with the Northern Triangle countries. So what Biden did is reverse all of these policies, and that's why you're seeing this incentive structure change so radically, because people have this idea that they can come across the border and they will get a bus ticket to wherever they want, and maybe they show up for the court date, maybe they don't.
Do you think people keep abreast with America's laws in that way, or do you think, like, so for instance, with the Haitian immigrants, you had immigrants saying that we heard that Biden would let us in, and I mean, that's not what Biden said. Do you get what I'm saying? So is there some sort of misinformation that's also going out there, or do you think people are just hearing this overwhelming rhetoric that the borders are wide? Like, sometimes I wonder if people saying the borders are wide open is what people might be hearing, and then they go like, oh, well, then we should go to America, because they said the borders are wide open.
Well, I don't think these immigrants are watching Fox News, and they don't follow me on Instagram, so
you never know.
Yeah.
News travels. You never know.
News travels, but that is the point, actually. And it travels mostly on social media and through their networks. And it's also promulgated by the drug cartels. So the biggest winner in all of this is the North Mexico drug cartels.
Right.
They get maybe $300 to $500 per person to get somebody across the border. Nobody gets through that border without them. They have the best border security in the world. So they make millions. And by the way, that's risk-free money, too. They don't have to be trafficking drugs anymore. You can get caught trafficking drugs. Here, they're just staying on the Mexican side, and they're
sending the people
making
across.
people go over. So there's a lot of human trafficking that occurs there, too. So none of this is good in any way. And I fail to see how it's compassionate to promulgate those open border policies when you can disincentivize it and reduce that kind of human trafficking and reduce the money flowing to these drug cartels.
Right. It's interesting because it's not a uniquely American problem, and maybe that's something that I've always struggled with in seeing these conversations. Any country that shares a border with a nation that is going through turmoil in some way, shape, or form is going to experience some sort of influx. That is natural, especially when one country is doing much better when it comes to its finances. So when you look at the coming in, when you look at DACA, when you look at these programs, one, what do you do about the people who are already here, who've been here, who've spent their whole lives here, who've grown up here as children? Do you think America at some point has to say, look, the people are here, it'll cost us a fortune to get them out, and for all intents and purposes, as you said, they've become American.
Yeah. So Republicans have been pretty willing to have conversation about DACA. All we asked is that you secure the border. Now, DACA, as defined by the Obama administration, see, that's very different than how they've started to define it now. And it's important that people distinguish these two definitions, because what Democrats have done in the last 2 years, multiple times, is passed the DREAMer Act, which would completely change the definition of DACA recipients to basically mean your age doesn't matter, when you came doesn't matter, which effectively means everyone.
I understand.
Okay,
so you're arguing the way Obama and his administration...
I'm very sympathetic to somebody who doesn't even speak Spanish, who was brought here as a child, and giving them some kind of legal security. I'm very sympathetic to that. But when it comes to broader immigration reforms, okay, what do you do? What do you do with the millions of people here? It's a very good question. The first thing you do is you have to stop the inflow. You have to stop the illegal crossings. I want to get to this point in America where we all agree that we should have zero tolerance for illegal immigration, primarily because it cuts in front of the line of legal immigrants who want to do this the right way. This is I'm from Houston. It's the most diverse city in America. I don't think a lot of people know that about Houston. We talk to legal immigrants all the time. They're very frustrated by this. Again, my stepmother is a legal immigrant.
Because they feel like people are cutting the line.
They feel like people are cutting the line. They feel that injustice is occurring against them, and I think they're right. Just because there's a long line doesn't mean you get to cut it. And by the way, there will always be a long line. For this country, there will always be a massive line. If you doubled the number of legal immigrants we have next year, tripled it, quadrupled it, there'd still be a massive line.
But America's not doing that.
No, we're not.
That's one of the things I've been intrigued by is, when you talk to some of the architects of America's original immigration policy, they have said that America hasn't done a good job of adjusting those numbers of who comes in and how.
Yeah.
And I mean, we see this in businesses, we see this with farming, you see them saying,
and
farmers
there's an
saying,
honest debate to be had there.
Yeah. People say we don't have the workers. We need, any country needs a steady flow of immigration. It feels like on that side, America hasn't done a particularly good job of updating how many people it actually needs to come in.
Fair. And I think we can debate which way those numbers should go.
Right.
Maybe it should depend on unemployment numbers here in this country. Maybe it should depend on a number of factors. We want to have those conversations. Because right then we're talking about changing things on the margin for legal immigration. I think those are worthy debates to have.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the books you've written. You speak your mind. You are, I think, a Republican who presents themselves as somebody who's willing to have discourse with people. I mean, you're here with me, you know. You've always said people need to avoid extreme rhetoric. And in some of your books, you know, I'll paraphrase, and forgive me if I don't phrase it correctly, but one of the lines that stuck out to me is you said, you know, we have to be careful not to offend people. We shouldn't try to go out of our way to offend people as human beings. But at the same time, we can also develop a lot of strength by not being offended by everything. In and around the culture of what people want to call cancel culture, you know, people go woke this and woke that and cancel culture. It seems like you're commenting on this, but I'd love to know what your opinion of cancel culture is. First of all, do you think that it's a real thing? And second of all, what do you think it actually means?
It means a couple of different things. So cancel culture in modern times, it can mean refusing to forgive someone for what was clearly a mistake. Okay. And I think in my story of cancel culture going on SNL, that's sort of what that was, right? Because there's a world where what Pete Davidson said, he didn't quite mean it. He didn't quite mean it as badly as people might have interpreted it as. Now, if they did mean it, it's a different story. Okay, now you have to deal with that. But when somebody takes an old tweet or whatever it is, and you see this constantly, we have to ask ourselves: is that fair? And is there really no forgiveness in our society? Is there no redemption allowed in our society? So that's one aspect of cancel culture as I see it. Another aspect, which I think is what probably right-wingers like a lot less, is this making traditional and normal things taboo all of a sudden. So this gets into, okay, we need to cancel Aunt Jemima, right? We need to cancel Paw Patrol. These things that didn't offend anybody 5 seconds ago are now deeply offensive and need to be canceled. I think that's what drives people crazy.
Right. But some of the things did offend people, and don't get me wrong, like Paw Patrol, and I think some of the things are...
It can go too far.
Yeah, no. I think there are combinations. Sometimes I think what happens is there are people online who just chime in. They're not really invested, they just chime in.
Right.
Then the algorithms online go like, oh, it's become a thing, and it wasn't really a thing. Yeah, it's trending. Then it becomes a thing. Then the media outlets jump on and they go like, they're trying to cancel. Then Fox will come from one side, they cancel. Then the MSNBC comes from the other side. But a lot of the time I find it's people who are just either criticizing, sometimes they're just roasting something, sometimes they're just making jokes and jumping on. I feel like there's this weird attitude where now we have lost our ability to separate canceling from criticism, from critique, from accountability even.
Yes.
Do you get what I'm saying?
I do get what you're saying, and we do have to have that nuanced conversation. And that's why I try to define cancel culture the way I defined it. I did not define it as everybody jumping on somebody.
Right.
If you say something totally atrocious, maybe you deserve to be jumped on. Maybe you deserve to be piled on.
Okay.
You know, and we have, but is what you just said what everybody's been saying for years?
Right.
And was it really worth piling on you for this?
And is it worth kicking you out of society forever?
That's why I say it's the changing of taboos that really is what we're talking about with cancel culture. And I totally agree with you. I think a lot of people like corporations, because I agree with you that a lot of times you see a bunch of people yelling online. To me and you, that doesn't mean much to us because we put it into perspective. We're used to large amounts of people. I say, 1,000 people said something really mean about me. But it's only 1,000.
Right.
You know, but some people are like, oh my God, that's the end of my life.
Right.
And a corporate CEO oftentimes too, well, we've got to pull that product because 1,000 angry people on Twitter said so. And I encourage them to stand their ground because you're always rewarded for not giving in to some of these silly cancel culture initiatives.
It feels like, for some people, Republicans are now trying to cancel books in schools. You know, Texas, I mean, your home state is now having this fight about critical race theory. You know, some schools who didn't even have critical race theory are fighting about critical race theory. People are confused about what it is or isn't. Yep. You know, people are saying we shouldn't teach certain things. Some books should be kicked out. It's confusing because it doesn't seem like everybody has the same definition for what the argument is. I do know that you've been outspoken on this. From your perspective, I would love to know what you think is going wrong in schools and why you think certain things should or shouldn't be taught. Or like, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I'd love to know from you directly.
So let's take the Texas example. I'm not a state legislator, so I can't speak in too much detail, but effectively, yes, they did ban CRT in schools. But what they also did is increase teaching about slavery, increase teaching about Jim Crow laws. So, because a lot of people say, who support CRT say, look, we're just teaching history. And we say, no, that's not what CRT is. I think CRT is a misinterpretation of history, and it leads to bad historical documents like the 1619 Project, which a bunch of historians had to go back and debunk.
Right.
Okay. So CRT is a narrative building. It's a theory. It's critical race theory. And it basically says that you should view institutions and society through the lens of race primarily.
Or rather that, if I understand correctly, or rather that you should acknowledge that race played a major role in the definition of some of those structures, I think.
And I think I can acknowledge that.
Okay.
What you just said, I can certainly, are there reverberations from past discrimination into modern society?
Yes.
We could have an honest conversation about that. But what critical race theory is often defined, not often, it always is defined this. Anytime I look into this and the writers of critical race theory, what really strikes me as odd about it, and I don't understand what the left defends it, because it seeks to challenge the liberal order. And it says this very clearly. It seeks to challenge Enlightenment rationality. It seeks to challenge neutral justice, neutral application of the law. It goes from this Ta-Nehisi Coates ideology that in order to fix past discrimination, there must be current discrimination.
Ooh, I don't know that he said that. Ta-Nehisi Coates? I don't believe that he's ever said that.
Ibram X. Kendi. Sorry.
Yeah, okay.
Ibram X. Kendi.
Yeah, because
Sorry. Ibram X. Kendi.
I still don't even know that. So
It did.
But not talking about
that. I'm 100% sure of.
But let's talk about. So this is the idea that I think is going back to the schools thing rather is. So you're saying you're not against them teaching slavery in schools?
Of course not. I learned about it ad nauseum as a kid.
So now, when talking about that, or when talking about what Jim Crow was, you're not against them explaining that this was specifically tied to race?
Of course not. Look, because you've made this argument many times, right? Redlining in the past can affect how neighborhoods today are segregated.
Yes, right.
Of course we can see the connection there. I don't think there's more to the story than that, but we can learn about that.
So do you think maybe then it's just a branding thing then?
Well,
is this like an Obamacare Affordable Care Act situation? Is that what we're dealing with here?
No, I don't. Because, I mean, if you really look at the literature surrounding CRT, I think it's very toxic. And I think it does teach. I also think it's counterproductive.
But there are schools that have had these fights and they don't have CRT. Literally, there are school boards where people are fighting about CRT and they have no CRT curriculum.
Well, I mean,
and then now what they're doing is they're getting rid of other books.
Yeah.
By like Toni Morrison, they're going like these, and books that have been in the schools, ironically.
Well, let's look at a recent example because there's all this fanfare going on and controversy going on in Virginia. We've got a governor's race coming up, and this is at the crux of it, right? What's being taught in schools.
Yes.
And so, has CRT been promulgated at the school level? And the answer is yes. I mean, there was directives from this current administration in Virginia that says you will teach critical race theory. So it's absolutely infiltrating schools. Oftentimes, I think you're right that there's not a class in high school called critical race theory, but it does infuse, the teachings of it do infuse something like diversity and inclusion training. Who would be against diversity and inclusion training? But I would be against it if you're teaching white students that they're evil. When a child has to come home and say, Mom, am I evil because I'm white? Or a black student has to say, am I disempowered? Am I automatically disempowered and at a disadvantage because I'm black? That's bad. You're setting that black student up for basically to be imprisoned by this sense of despair for the rest of their life. And I don't see why you would start somebody's life off that way.
This goes to a certain Republican ideology, and we'll move on after this. Where I feel there's a difference, I feel, between telling somebody where they are or what obstacles they may face and victim mentality. Yeah. And I think there's a difference between the two, because I don't think it is wrong to tell a black child, hey, we live in this neighborhood because of this. Your grandfather's house was taken away in Hermosa Beach or wherever, Manhattan Beach or wherever they lived. We had a business that we lost in this place, Tulsa, Oklahoma, whatever these things are. I think it is valid to have those conversations the same way America has these conversations about the British and like this is how things came to be. The same way Jewish people will have conversations like, hey, your grandparents got kicked out of Poland. That's why we're here today. Right. And so I don't think that necessarily is creating a victim mentality. I think it's crucial to say
it doesn't have to.
Right, but I think
it doesn't have.
I think the one can exist without the other.
They can. You just have to be careful about it. And I think CRT forces that pendulum to swing rather far to the victimization mentality.
Okay, I see what you're saying. But you're saying you're not against the conversations. It's just how the framing of the conversations.
I don't think the conversations are threatening.
Let's talk a little bit before I let you go about COP.
Yes.
You're heading out to COP26. A lot of people will be surprised to hear this. They're going like, Dan Crenshaw, what are you doing at COP? This is a climate change meeting. But you're one of the Republicans who said, no, we must have conversations about climate change and what we're going to do about it. I know previously in 2018, I think it was on Facebook, you had this video where you said the science hasn't been settled, the temperatures haven't risen, and Hurricane Harvey, the effects can't be tied to climate change. I believe your views have evolved in that time, and I'd love to know what your ideas are going forward about what you think America needs to do.
I don't think I ever said any of those things in a video. On
Facebook?
No.
Oh, I hope I'm wrong.
I would never.
No, I genuinely hope I'm wrong.
I would have never claimed that.
Could be fake news. And
that
I'm glad you hear them.
Haven't risen. So I've always, this has always been my position.
Okay.
Is look, climate change is real. There's obviously a human element to that, and we need to take it seriously. Any science, any data that I will cite in this conversation will be from the UN IPCC,
right?
The UN
gold
climate,
standard,
the
really.
UN climate report. What I point out in many of these cases, and maybe what I was referring to in that video, is for something like Hurricane Harvey, there is no serious scientist that would attribute a single weather event to a trend. Right. It would be, that wouldn't be science. That would just be conjecture. That's probably what I was referring to in this video that must have been from a very long time ago. But I would never suggest that temperatures haven't necessarily risen.
Got it.
Of course they have. And they'll continue to rise to an extent. So it's a problem. There's going to be a cost associated with the problem. It's not quite what the alarmists say it is, and we can quibble with that. But the real conversation has to be about what solutions we're actually in favor of.
That's what everyone's fighting about, yeah.
And it seems to me that, look, if you're a Green New Dealer, you believe that the only solutions are solar and wind. You have to electrify the grid completely. I think that's nonsense. I'm not against solar and wind, but I don't think they should receive 250 times more subsidies than nuclear energy, which gives us reliable energy and it's carbon free. So there's smarter ways to do this. I don't think we should attack the oil and gas industry, especially in America. Why is that? Why do I say that? Well, because you got to look at what worked. Okay, we've reduced emissions in this country more than the next 10 countries combined. We're back to 1992 levels. Why is that? Almost entirely because of gas, because of the fracking industry, because it displaced coal. Okay, it has about 50% of the emissions of coal. Imagine doing the same thing via our exports and via trade deals with China and India. You know, China last year built 3 times more coal capacity than the rest of the world combined.
Yeah, China hasn't been playing by the rules. I mean, everyone knows this.
They don't play by any rules. They play by their own. Well, they play by the rules that the Paris Climate Accord gave them, which is you can keep emitting until 2030. So if you're the Chinese, what are you going to do? I'm just going to keep building coal plants so that in 2030, well, yeah, I built 100 new coal plants, but now I can build 99, and I can say I reduced it.
Hasn't America always been about what does America do? Like, the world follows America. It feels like America has an opportunity here to go, oh, China's slipping on this. We're going to take the mantle. We will be the leaders in creation of new energy. Now, please don't get me wrong. I think it is foolish for anyone to think this can happen overnight.
Yeah.
I think you have to transition. We've seen that you can't create enough energy from the sources that we talked about, wind, etc., solar. They haven't found ways to replicate that energy immediately overnight. I agree with you on this. But surely there are ways that now the gas and coal industries, especially the oil industries really, can really, I think, pull a little bit more of their weight. I mean, they themselves, I think it was the oil and, what do they call, you probably know their name better. It's the industry of, like, you know, all the oil companies have come together and they said, hey, we are for paying what essentially amounts to a carbon tax. You know?
Some of the big oil companies are. You got to be careful with how we interpret what they're saying, because what that does is displace a lot of the medium-sized oil companies.
Interesting. So you saying they're using that as a stick move?
And if you're going to have a carbon tax, it needs to be globalized. Like, there should be a China carbon tax. I mean, if we're going to talk about a carbon tax,
wait for China though. Like no. And honestly, this is my only thing. Is like, is America going to wait for China to follow the rules before it just does the right thing?
No, we don't have to wait. Again, what I mentioned a minute ago was the Chinese have an interest in reliable energy that's cheaper. And that looks a lot like U.S. natural gas. And so in the last administration, we talked about this, getting China to buy $12 billion worth of natural gas. Let me give you a stat. If you displaced coal in China with natural gas right now, you'd have about a 50% reduction, which is about a 13 to 15% reduction globally in emissions. Talk about massive change without even harming anybody, economically speaking. Because what everybody's worried about, including, say, the president of Uganda, who wrote that scathing letter, editorial in the Wall Street Journal, they are not going to put off getting their people out of poverty just for the sake of this obsession with solar and wind. So we can lead. I'm not saying we shouldn't lead, but we should lead with technological innovations, including our oil and gas companies. And they do a lot of this, by the way. Carbon capture is, the carbon capture technology is growing radically. Exxon's talking about a carbon hub in the Houston area. There's ways to not destroy our economy while also reducing emissions, and that's why I'm going to COP26 to promulgate that view.
Before I let you go then, you have these conversations with your fellow Republicans. What it feels like to me right now, as somebody who just observes, is it feels like the Republican Party is in a really interesting watershed moment where I think it's, 46% or 43% of Republicans identify as Trumpers before Republicans. you know, it now feels like the party is at a point where, you know, to use sporting analogies, we'd always complain about this back in the day. We'd go like, players have forgotten that the badge is more important than the player, you know, and you're trying to do certain things. You have come under fire, for instance, just for saying to people, hey, Trump didn't lose because of some weird election fraud or whatever. You've come under fire for this. What do you think the future of the Republican Party will be? Do you think the Republican Party can avoid being co-opted by Trump? And if the answer is yes or no, what do you think the next moves need to be for Republicans to keep moving forward without being locked down in one person's ideology?
Yeah, and I tell Republicans all the time, we can't be locked into one person. You know, we're a party that follows a set of ideals. What is conservatism? It's a problem-solving mechanism. That's what we're selling to the American people. We should talk about this more often, by the way. Conservatism is a mechanism by which we solve problems through a framework of limiting principles, fundamentally. We should not get away from that. Limiting principles is a key part of that. And an adherence to Western liberal values is a key part of that. I will say this. I do a ton of events. I've been doing a ton of events for the past year. And these are Republican events, of course. And the people who come to a Republican event tend to be the more primary voter activist crowd, right? Yeah. And I don't get questions about this. I always get questions about this from the media, always. I never, and I mean that in an absolute sense. I mean never. Never do I get this question about Trump from voters on the ground. So I think polling has to be taken with a grain of salt. I think people are very, especially Republicans, are very, very suspicious of pollsters, and they don't ever want to give in to you. So they want to defend Trump but it doesn't mean they're obsessed with him. But they do. Okay. But they feel the need to defend him, and so they'll tell that pollster, "Yeah, I'm a Trump."
Well, it could explain why the polls are often wrong.
They are often wrong, yeah,
especially in and around Trump and Republicans.
Right, because we have a very suspicious view of pollsters for whatever reason, and so you have to take it with a grain of salt.
Well, I could talk to you forever, but I know you have to go. You're catching a train back to D.C. Thank you for taking the time.
Oh, this was fun.
Thank you for chatting with me, and I hope to have you back on again. Good luck at COP26.
Thank you.
Don't forget, people, the Congressman's books are available at dancrenshaw.com, and you can check out his podcast, Hold These Truths.